Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Brief. I'm your host, Meredith Reed. I'm here today with Sean Herman. He's a father of two, an author, and the founder of Kinzoo Technologies, Inc. Kinzoo is a new messenger app that turns screen time into family time. Inspired by the early experiences that his daughter had with technology, Sean aims to make Kinzoo a leading communication platform for children and families. He thinks this is possible through better education and tools for parents. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you. So could you just start by giving us a brief overview of Kinzoo? What is it and who is it for?
Sure. So Kinzoo is a new messaging platform that we've introduced onto the app in the Play Store. The idea behind Kinzoo is it's a messenger for families inclusive of children. So what we're trying to do is give children as young as 5 or 6 years old the ability to participate in the family discussion, but also to connect them with people like grandparents and uncles and aunties where if they have a relationship today, it's usually filtered through the parents. And what Kinzoo is trying to do is empower them to have more, stronger connections with people in the extended family, friends, and in a time like this, connecting them with classmates and things like that. But Kinzoo is built on the pillars of privacy and really trying to find ways to connect, promote creativity and learning within the experience.
So can you describe the pain point with other messaging platforms that were already on the market that led you to build Kinzoo?
Yeah, definitely. Kinzoo really came about because about 2 years ago, I had moved to Vancouver from Calgary up in Canada here. And I moved ahead of my family because my daughter was finishing school. I had started a new position at a different startup. And we're waiting for my daughter to finish. So what actually started to happen was we started using this platform that I was working on, which was actually a B2B video sharing platform, just moving video around a private network. We used that for a while, and then she actually started to onboard her grandparents, friends from school and things like that. But I really started to understand kind of how special it was to get that message directly from her. And at a certain point in time, I said, okay, it's time to get off this platform. Let's find something that's more appropriate. I surveyed the market and tried a few out, and it kind of came to the conclusion that I didn't feel comfortable with any of them that were on the market. The largest incumbent is Messenger for Kids, which comes from Facebook. And that just didn't feel right for me, for a 7-year-old to be exposed to the Facebook business model. So that really led to kind of building the business plan for Kinzoo. Really started with a need that I had my own family. And I thought there were enough parents out there that were looking for a solution that actually prioritized privacy. So that led to creating Kinzoo and where we are today.
So could you elaborate a little bit more on some of the risks that kids face when they use these other online messaging platforms?
Yeah, I think that the Facebook platform in particular is actually, it's a pretty good platform just in terms of being safe and secure and things like that. They have had some hiccups along the way, but I think that comes with scaling back a product that's meant for mass growth and scale back into something that has to be, private and secure. So they have had instances where kids were able to connect with strangers and things like that. All in all, I think it's a decent product. For me, it's more about the business model when it comes to the Facebook product. Larger though, we've seen stats that there's millions and millions of children that are using adult platforms. So that could be things like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, those kind of platforms. And as a parent, I worry about those a little bit more because there's the obvious stuff of being able to connect with strangers and people that aren't known. But even underneath all that, it kind of introduces them into this culture of popularity and competition when it comes to likes and follower counts and things like that. And that's really what I'm trying to protect my daughter from as well.
That makes sense. And I think it's so important that there is a platform where kids can just be safe, connect with family, connect with friends, and not have to run into all of these outside strangers. So when you were building this, how did you and your team think about and balance the trust and safety aspect versus building more quickly and shipping out a frictionless product?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we continue to encounter really on a daily basis. We had to make a lot of decisions along the way, really balancing out kind of, we want the ability to grow, but we want to do that in a way that's not going to compromise safety and security and privacy. I would say that, Kinzoo, we started working on the product about 2 years ago. We only hit the app stores in January, which was very quiet, and only now we've kind of done a formal launch. The reason it took so long is we had to test the product extensively with a lot of families. We're trying to kind of cover off a user base that spans really from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds. In building that, it took a lot of iterations to kind of come up with a UI, a user experience, and a user interface that was going to work. Also in line with that, I would say before we wrote a single line of code, we partnered with a company in the US called KidSafe, and they are a safe harbor provider when it comes to COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. So we wanted to make sure really before we even wrote a line of code that we were going to adhere to the COPPA regulations, which I think are very important as a parent because they do protect children's privacy, which I argue at the young ages is really coupled very tightly with safety. And so we worked with them really from day one. We got COPPA certified before we wrote a line of code. And then within Kinzoo, we have a lot of examples of things that we've put into the app that maybe will actually stop our growth or prohibit us from growing as fast as maybe we could, but we thought it was the right thing to do. So as an example, we use magic codes as the only way to connect. People have to know each other's magic codes. There's no open search bar or anything like that to find people on Kinzoo. And that's something that it would definitely help us grow faster if we kind of opened the reins, but we thought the trade-off in terms of safety and privacy was just too high.
Absolutely. So next question for you, which types of content can be shared on Kinzoo?
So today we support audio, video, photos, text, emoji, and stickers. And we are looking right now for to introduce GIFs into the program as well, but they're going to have to be age appropriate. So we're just working on some filtering abilities and things like that. But because we have the wide range of users, things like audio messages are actually used more than video, which is a little bit surprising. But what we're really trying to do is, again, make it inclusive for all members of the family. So even if children as young as 4 or 5 want to be on Kinzoo, they can send things like audio messages and video messages as opposed to text.
So have you already set something up, a moderation and detection system for toxic behaviors? Or has that not been something that you've run into enough yet where it's been made a priority?
Yeah, it's a priority. I think that Kinzoo by nature has been designed to be an extremely closed system. So the first thing that we're trying to do is be preventative just in terms of managing the way that people connect within Kinzoo and really limiting the ability for kids to connect with anybody that's not, a part of family or a very close friend. For a connection to be made has to be initiated by the parent, has to be approved by parents on both sides. So both child A and child B, their parents have to agree before the connection is made. So the first thing that we're trying to do with all of our base workflows is just reduce as much as we can the opportunities for bad behavior and bad actors interacting with people that aren't known. Aside from that, we've got some basic filters, content filters, and things like that. We've spoken to companies like Bark who have an AI-based platform that that looks for bad behaviors and evidence of self-harm or cyberbullying. So that's an add-on product that parents could have in addition to Kinzoo if they wanted to go that extra mile. We have talked to companies about potentially introducing some of that within the Kinzoo ecosystem. But the issue with that to date has been we would have to move data off of our platform onto someone else's so that they could scan it. And personally, I'm just not comfortable with that as of yet. I haven't seen a proposal that feels right. And it feels like we're potentially exposing personal data in the form of messages or videos and photos. And it kind of goes outside of our ecosystem, which just doesn't feel quite right. So I think we're always looking for ways to improve it, hoping to manage, again, the way that people connect, keep it a tight community, and then looking for ways to augment that.
Right. And you made such a great point that it's always a trade-off when it comes to trust and safety. Anytime that you can't keep something in-house, there are risks involved with that as well. So you mentioned on your website that better education and tools for parents are an essential part of having a positive experience on messaging platforms. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to technology, there's a few things that we're trying to kind of push as an agenda. So really where this comes from is I have a really strong belief that technology can actually be a very positive force in the life of families. I've experienced it myself, and it's become much less of a contentious issue. I think we still battle over screen time and think, my daughter always wants more, and you have to kind of manage that. But I would say by focusing in on what they actually do on the screens, as opposed to just how much time they're spending on screens, has really been helpful in the household. So I really have this deep belief that technology has a lot to offer if we focus in on what it does extremely well, which is when it acts as a connector, enables kids to be creative and explore their creativity, and enhances learning. And those are kind of the three pillars that we built Kinzoo around. The fourth pillar that we talk about that we aren't as interested in is like consumption. And there's plenty of platforms that are, fighting over their attention, including YouTube and Netflix and all the others. That's a pillar that we're not so interested in. But when it comes to the other three, I think there's lots of opportunity for technology to be additive in the life of families. But we often say that the existing tools aren't that strong, as we've kind of talked about. And the second aspect is kind of education around tech. And what we're really trying to do is push this idea that not all screen time is created equal. And if we look for better ways and more productive uses of screens, we can start to unlock some of the potential that technology has. And Kinzoo, and we have a blog, and we're always trying to educate. I wrote a book on the subject. So we're doing as much as we can to kind of shift thinking among parents and not be so alarmist, but actually be a little more practical when it comes to the subject of screen time.
So what is the title of your book and what is it about?
Yeah, so the book is called Screen Captured, and it really came about after the early days of Kinzoo because we were looking so much into dark patterns and persuasive design and things like that. I was starting to become very aware of the way a lot of apps were built, which is really how do we kind of hook the user in and keep them coming back? And there's a lot of mechanisms for doing that. So there were really obvious ones that I knew we didn't want to do. I started to educate myself on the ones that were a little less obvious, and even things like the like button on Facebook is a classic example of a way that kind of feeds into our behavior and in a way the variable reward, and it kind of gets the dopamine cycle going and keeps us coming back. So that's a good example of something that may not seem harmful on the surface, but there's more going on behind it. And a lot of the original founders of Facebook and platforms like that have started speaking out around it. And where I eventually got to was I had learned so much about kind of how all of this works and how social media works, and kind of compared that to this new trend of children coming online in massive numbers. And at the end, it started to really break screen time down. And really the conclusion I got to is quality over quantity, and to be a little bit more aware of kind of what's going on when they're on the screens. It really helped break screen time down for me and my family, and I thought other parents could benefit. So I ended up writing a book on it.
So on a similar note, because of COVID, so many families have been spending a lot more in-person time with their families at home. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how what has happened with COVID over the past couple months has, how it's had an impact on Kinzoo.
Sure. I think we, like a lot of other platforms that are connectors, we saw an initial spike early on, kind of in the early to mid-March when the at-home orders were just going into effect and people were now staying home. And there was kind of an initial spike, and then it's kind of waned. And anecdotally, I kind of look at what's going on out there, and it seems like technology kind of had a moment, and everyone was looking at it in slightly different ways as really, forget the screen time things. I just need to connect with friends and family, and privacy was kind of thrown, I think, to the side. And we saw things like Zoom and House Party explode. And then over subsequent weeks, we've seen, I think, a bit of a scaling back, and you're starting to actually see some backlash around, you know what, I don't like being on a Zoom call all day long every day. And so I think it's kind of like settled into normalcy. So I think our curve kind of followed that. We saw an initial spike and then a little bit of, it's maintained, but it's kind of declining. And I actually think it's a good thing for us, because we exist to really find new ways to connect an underrepresented, group of people, which is really children. And I do see a lot of concerns with putting, the number of children that have gone on Zoom and these kind of platforms, for instance, which are not COPPA certified. They don't necessarily have, the right things in place for children's privacy. And, to their, I guess I understand from their perspective, they didn't set out to be a social network. They just kind of became one. But I think that they're kind of now catching up and doing as much as they can. I think they've handled it actually fairly well. But, the child segment has been underrepresented, and I'm excited that Kinzoo is able to kind of connect kids with people that are maybe a little bit more isolated outside the home, that they can't visit, so whether that's grandparents or uncles or aunties, or a way to stay in touch with their friends at school in a direct relationship, which is really exciting. And that really is kind of the underlying value proposition of Kinzoo.
Yeah, absolutely. So one final question for you. Looking to the future, what do you think the biggest challenges that social digital platforms are going to face over the next year when it comes to user safety? And what advice do you have for your peers and other people in the messaging space?
Yeah, I think there's always ongoing challenges. I think one of the biggest changes that's occurred recently is YouTube being fined by the FTC back in late 2019. Although that doesn't really relate directly to messaging and social media, it was a very important thing that happened, because I think by and large, it was really an acknowledgement that kids are online, and they're online in massive numbers. And to date, I wrote about this, and it was really easier for platforms to kind of ignore the fact that kids were using them and just kind of take the user count and not have to deal with the regulation. The YouTube settlement is the first example of the regulators kind of saying, no, that's not true. We know kids are on the platform. Kids are on the platform. We need to make some changes. So it'll be interesting to see platforms like TikTok and Snapchat. I think that similarly, we know a lot of kids under the age of 13, where COPPA cuts off, are using them, and in big numbers. So I'm really interested to see if the FTC and the regulatory bodies start to kind of hone in on those kind of companies. I think we'll continue to see, I think there's a huge macro trend moving towards privacy, and especially as it relates to children. So I think we'll continue to see movement there, and that'll be a challenge for a lot of companies that maybe now have to deal with privacy regulation that they didn't. The advantage for Kinzoo is we built from the ground up around that. So I think we're in probably better shape. And yeah, in terms of advice for others, I mean, I think it's just important. Like Kinzoo really exists because of two big macro trends, and one is a movement towards privacy. Two is the fact that kids are going online younger and younger, and they're getting onto platforms that are connected earlier and earlier. So that's really why we exist. And the only call out would be, I think we need broader acknowledgement around the fact that, kids make up 40% of all new internet users. I think 175,000 come online every day under the age of 15. So it is a segment that makes up a huge portion of the internet. And I think to date, it's just been underregulated and a bit of the Wild West. So I hope we see more regulators step in. I hope we see better platforms that are kind of ethically driven, built for the needs of their users and not the advertisers. And yeah, I mean, as a father, that's really what I hope to see and what we're trying to build, of course.
Well, thank you, Sean. You have given us so many important things to think about and a lot of really valuable information regarding child safety online. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we will see you next time on The Brief.